Welcome to the UIAAA Connection podcast. Hometown Ticketing is proud to be the exclusive sponsor of the UIAAA Connection podcast and to provide schools nationwide with the best options for digital ticketing for their events. Visit their website at hometownticketing.com to learn how they can make digital ticketing possible and simple at your school. Thank you to Hometown Ticketing for their exclusive sponsorship of the UIAAA Connection podcast.
Welcome back to another edition of the UIAAA Connection. I'm your host, Mark Hutch Hunters. Today we have as our special guest, Fred Smith, Certified Master Athletic Administrator, the Director of Athletics at Bangor High School in Michigan. Fred, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you found your way to Michigan.
Well, I think you're the first. I don't know I know we call them Yoopers if you're on there, but I know you're not a Yooper, so I don't know how many Michiganders.
Well, I'm a Yooper at heart. Yooper at heart.
There you go. Let's have you start by sharing with our audience here in Utah and across the nation where you grew up, where you went to college, your first job, those types of things.
Well, I grew up in Battle Creek, Michigan, the cereal city. Like most kids, played all youth sports. In town, we had two public high schools and one Catholic high school, and I lived out in we at the time called the suburbs. And I can remember going to a summer basketball camp at the public high school out in the Battle Creek Lakeview. And as we're going through drills, it still struck me. Their varsity coach commented to his instructors, "Don't work with me," because I was going to the Catholic school. And I was from a Catholic school family, and there, no doubt where it's going to go. But it's still, struck me to this days. But played summer baseball with my dad as a coach for several seasons. I can still remember him one time catching batting practice and kind of getting temporarily knocked out with a bat to the back of my head as a kid swung through and missed. And when I came through, my dad wanted to know where I learned my swear words. As I swore at the time, but when we moved downtown so we could walk to that Catholic school, there was an ad in the paper. I tried out for a local FOP team, made that team. I was still quite tall at that time, and I was kind of impressed. They sent me down to the local sporting goods dealer in town to get my own personal catching equipment. But I played every summer. The sport that was in season was my favorite. When we moved downtown, we were within sounds of the Battle Creek Central High School and listened to their games over their PA and everything. In high school, I played football, basketball, track, and baseball. We were a small Catholic school. Our basketball team, our senior year, made it to the Final Four, and it was quite an experience. From there, I went on to the UP, Michigan Tech University, on a basketball scholarship.
Now, let me interrupt you, and I'm a little bit familiar with the UP, but I don't know where Michigan Tech is.
Michigan Tech is up in Houghton, the Keweenaw Peninsula, probably 2 hours from the Air Force Base that you were at, 2 hours west of Marquette. My daughter went to Northern Michigan in Marquette, and I always chuckled when we would take her up there. There's a sign just as you turn to Marquette, Houghton 100 miles, and my parents had to drive another 2 hours. There's actually a 10-hour drive from my home to get to Michigan Tech.
And it's west, so Lake Superior State's the one I'm familiar with.
Lake Superior State is probably 5 hours from Michigan Tech. Lake Superior State is on the east side of the UP, and Michigan Tech's on the west side, up in the Keweenaw Peninsula.
So you're closer to Green Bay than you are to Sault Ste. Marie, obviously.
Yes, and actually from our house here, it's closer to drive around Chicago through Wisconsin to Michigan Tech than it is to drive up across the bridge. That is, if you can put up with the Chicago traffic.
That's amazing. Sorry to interrupt. Continue.
I lasted 2 years at Michigan Tech before I transferred downstate to Western. I kind of came to the conclusion that I really didn't have a future in the NBA. The only slow white man I knew that couldn't jump that made it was Bill Lambier, and I wasn't of that quality. So I actually started my coaching career at my alma mater when I was going to Western. I commuted from Battle Creek. We're about 30 minutes from Kalamazoo, And I still have a copy of my first coaching contract for seventh grade basketball, which was $25.
Wow. And
And
what
I did well. So the next year I got 100% raise and made $50.
that's incredible. So you were talking, you started then in the early
This
70s?
this was, yeah, I graduated high school in 73. So my coaching career started in probably 75, 76. Um, from Western after I graduated from Western, I took a full-time teaching or substitute teaching job at Benton Harbor area schools, where I did do my student teaching and coach football and ninth grade football and track and field there for a couple of years before I got my first time coaching job or coaching and teaching at the local Catholic high school in St. Joe, where I taught middle school sciences back in the day. If you had a teaching degree, you were qualified to teach anything in the middle school, even though my degree was phys ed and history. Um, Coach football, basketball, track for them. Was a varsity track and field coach, head coach for 8 years, and varsity football coach for 5 years.
Well,
6 years into that position, they hired me as interim, and I really haven't left the position since. Spent 6 years as their AD, 16 at Comstock, 8 at Buchanan, 2 at Benton Harbor, 4 in retirement, which I failed retirement, and I'm in my second year back at Bangor.
well, all I have to say is if you being a good Catholic kid, you'll appreciate this. If you spend 6 years in a middle school, as far as I'm concerned, you have a one-way ticket to heaven.
Uh,
You have got it made.
I actually spent 12 years there, and my wife 10, and she says that all the time that we have our ticket. Um, it was yeah, it was an interesting time, fun time. Some of the best people. I mean, we worked with some great teachers there. My wife and I always talked that if we ever won the lottery and started our own school, there'd be some teachers there would reach out. They were just fabulous educators.
That's incredible. Let's talk for a minute about some of the mentors you had in your life, parents, teachers, coaches,
Well,
bosses that had an effect on you.
as most your guests say, your first mentors are your parents.
Sure.
And my mom, two things she taught me that I've carried on in life is one, it's better to serve than to be served, and two, it's better to give than collect stuff. And so I've always have tried to serve others, and certainly haven't been worried about collecting stuff. My dad taught me my work ethic. He worked several jobs to put his 6 kids through Catholic school education. He coached us in sports, followed us when we were coaching. A typical parent. And I used to call him when I would talk to other ADs that he was an AD's worst nightmare. He'd stand at the top of the bleachers, yelling at the officials, yelling at the coach. Would come home. Why did the coach call that play? And I remember one homecoming game we lost by 2, and we had 4th and goal on the 1, and we called what I thought was the perfect running play, but it didn't work. And I get home, my dad says, "Why did your coach kick the field goal? Who's your kicker?" And I looked at him and says, "I am. That's why we didn't kick." But he loved us all. I mean, he had to be proud. We had I have 4 sisters and one brother, and as a dad, I was all state in basketball. My younger brother was all state in football, and my one of my sisters was all state in volleyball. And basketball, we made it to the Final Four. Uh, my sister's volleyball team made it to the state finals, and my brother's football team was at that time the mythical state championship in Michigan in football. So my dad did live through us. He was a good athlete in his days. Um, he was played some minor league baseball and may have had a chance to make it to the big league till he threw his arm out. But I can remember him taking him to his granddaughter's youth softball games, and he grew up in the area. It was okay to yell at blue, and I had
Mm,
to,
yeah.
hey, come on, Dad, let's go down and sit in right field and just enjoy the game. But my first professional mentor was Herb Quaid at Benton Harbor, and if he was still around or his family was still around, he's a classic candidate for the NIAAA Hall of Fame. He was on, and I didn't know it until Phil Ryson showed us a picture. I think at one of the coordinators meeting, he was on he was in the picture of the group of ADs that first worked on the charter for the NIAAA. He always was at the
Wow.
conferences,
That's
and
incredible.
Yeah, and before I took my job at Lake Michigan Catholic, he was an usher in our church, and I talked to him afterwards at Donuts, and he says, "Don't take the job if they won't let you go to your conference. You need to go to your state and national conferences." And because of his advice, I haven't missed a national conference in 38 years. My first conference was 1985 in Anaheim, and
That's
I've gone to every
impressive.
one since. My other big mentor in my professional career had to be Jack Roberts, the MHSA longtime executive director. His philosophy on educational athletics, he kind of matched mine, or I learned from him and followed his. And you know, if I start to name MIAAA and MIAAA mentors, it'd take a whole nother podcast, Mark. There are
Sure,
too many of
absolutely.
them in my 38 years. Um, but the,
Understandable. Let's backtrack for a minute. So you took your first AD job was what year and at what high school?
it was at Lake Michigan Catholic in 1987. No, 1985, because I went to the conference in 85. And it
And then,
was what I mean, I was just teaching and coaching there. And at the time, we had an interim principal, and the parents wanted a principal. So they moved the AD to the principal, and they asked me if I'd be the interim AD. And I, said sure, and took over. And like I say, I was there for 6 years before I took an opportunity to move on to Comstock.
well, that's perfect. So the reason I ask that is that's close to 38 years ago, not close to. So the job of AD today, how has it changed since you first took the job in 1985?
Well, the biggest change is I think we're starting to delegate more of our responsibilities. The big one is hiring officials. I loved hiring my officials. I would treat them well. I'd get the officials I wanted, and and I'd get them ahead of time, so I wasn't scrambling. And now we have assigners that assign, and
Mm-hmm.
and and they'll assign officials that I wouldn't hire. But it's just that you go out and I mean, I stepped out because we have a shortage of officials, and we had to move some football games this past fall because of official shortage. So I went on my own and hired all my officials for next year because of my relationship with them and moving the games off nights that the assigners need them. But that's the big change. We used to do that. Technology. I
Mm-hmm.
remember how excited we were when the fax machine came in the office. Now, on the day of an event, we could call Mark Hunter and say, "Hey, fax over your roster. We need your roster for tonight."
Right.
And now in our league, all our rosters are on the cloud,
Online.
and I can just
Sure.
go in there and print the roster that I need. Another big change is in ticketing. Your sponsor, Hometown Ticketing and digital ticketing.
Right.
Um, we use fully digital ticketing for our conference wrestling match this past Saturday. And all but one, we did one gentleman said we had to take his cash. And just a minute, I forgot to silence my phone. Um, so we took one, but the rest were all digital. And at the end of the night, I could print out the report, didn't have to count any cash, compared to a regional cross country meet where we charged $10 a car, and it took us almost 2 hours afterwards to pull the money out of the lumber bags and sort it and count the $4,000 in cash. Um, so that has changed. What hasn't changed is relationships. We're in a relationship business, and
Exactly.
you need to build relationships with all your stakeholders. And where that comes in, it just happened recently with me. When you have to make a tough decision and you have a good relationship with the parent, and they disagree with your decision, you can still go on and be friends. And so I've
That's
still,
very well.
and that's what
Yeah.
that's what I missed when I was playing golf in the UP when the principal from Bangor called me and said his AD was resigning, stepping down. This was in end of September. He wanted to know if I'd come and help him out. And I said, well, let me check with Linda when I get home. She just retired, So kind of the joke at home was I enjoyed 4 years of retirement, and we lasted 1 month together. Um, but when I went back to work, with them, it took me a week to realize I missed the relationships. And
Right.
so I'm going to continue at this as long as it'll have me.
That's perfect. Let's have you share your journey with our listeners, your journey with the MIAAA, which is long and storied, and your journey with the NIAAA, which is in additionally long and storied, and talk about how that
Actually,
happened.
because of Herb Quaid, my journey started first with the NIAAA. I mean, I'm hired as AD in middle of October, and I'm going to the national conference in Anaheim in December. And so I really hadn't even gotten, I joined the MIAAA and the NIAAA, but I really had no involvement with them. And now here's a young kid who's never flown before, flying out to Anaheim. We land on a tarmac, and you get off the plane in the middle of the runway there. And I felt, man, I just flew across the country. I want to kiss the tarmac. And then I got thinking, well, wait a minute. People do this all the time. Um, but I really didn't know anybody then. I rented a car because I'd never been to California, and I had my wife some relatives up there that I wanted to visit, and I wanted to see California a little bit. And being at a Catholic school, I stayed at an offsite hotel called the Blue Moon, $19 a
Mhm.
night, right across from Disney. There's a short walk to the hotel center. Um, and then I went to some sessions, but really didn't know too many ADs yet besides Herb. Herb runs me now and says, "Fred, we need your ticket." Because back then you had to reserve your banquet seats, and
Right.
you'd have one of your members would go get in line at 2 a.m. to
Exactly.
be there, be one of the early ones in line. So I'd give them my ticket, and that's when I found out about hospitality rooms. In the next couple of years at conferences, I'd find out where everybody's hospitality suite was, and that's how I got to know people across the country, by just going into the hospitality room to smooch on their food. I mean, Kentucky and Florida had great hospitality,
Oh,
in Wisconsin,
absolutely.
and but while I was there, I filled out an application for a committee, and several years later, I got asked to be on the credentials committee, and then in and then and Herb did start getting me involved with the MIAAA, but because of my involvement on the credentials committee and attending the conference, I think it was 1996 that it became Michigan's opportunity to put somebody on the NIAAA board.
Right.
And our officers came to me because I'd been somewhat involved. And I said, being young, I said, sure, I'll be happy to do that. And what was unique was I was coming off the credentials committee and going on the board at the end of the Orlando conference. And so we're going to Orlando. I think our kids were probably 10 and 4 at the time or something. And so I talked
Yeah.
my wife into taking them. I said, we bring them on down. We'll go to Disney. I said, I have no responsibilities. I'm not on the credentials committee. I go on the board at the end of the conference. Till about a week before, I get a letter from Jim Watkins telling me as an incoming board member, I got to be here, 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 and here and here. So I kind of miss my kids' trips to Disney, but that was interesting. But it was, from that involvement and the getting involved with the Leadership Training Institute, Michigan, I got on our board, served a term as president. I still am termed the state coordinator emeritus. I'm trying to bring some other people along, and I'm also our professional development chair. So, it's because of relationships. I've stayed involved with everybody, and still enjoy serving.
Well, talk about, you mentioned your time as a state coordinator, and I still think you're the state coordinator in Michigan. So let's share some of the successes just from your being the coordinator in Michigan, because you
Well,
and I, and of course many
that
others, have
was
been
an
to those
that was an
September meetings
interesting journey.
forever.
Yeah, that my state coordinator was an interesting journey because when they first brought out leadership training, they didn't have state coordinators. There
Right.
was only classes were only taught at the national, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time as we developed. Just as we were developing, splitting up that 8-hour 501 course, where the people that attended it looked like deer in headlights coming out. As we were, bringing on the 504 legal course, Jack Roberts came to the MIAAA and says, I want us to pair up and teach legal to our ADs in Michigan." And I said, Jack, we have a course. Let me see if I can bring it to Michigan. Well, we then brought Jim Teff and Tim Flannery to Michigan to teach 501 and 504. And this was before we had a leadership training and instructors course.
Right.
And,
Before the
and so,
790, 590
well,
back
it
then.
first started out as 590
Right.
before it went to 790, but this was pre 590 before they
Hmm.
decided they needed it. So they came and taught 501 and 504 in March of 1998. And in August of 1998, at three different places in the state of Michigan, we taught 504 to, I think it was 87 ADs. And we were the first state to teach at the state level. Um, in 1999, we offered 501 and 502. Looking at our records in 2001, 2002 was the first time we offered the 590 to start training other instructors, and we've have offered classes at our um, conference ever since at various times. So I'm very proud of Michigan and their uh, willingness to teach classes at the conference, and um, our involvement with the state coordinators. But yeah, I mean, I'm it's hard to walk away, Mark, when it's something you love to do. So I enjoy going to
Oh,
the coordinators and um,
absolutely. I hear you. Let's have you share some stories, one or two, from your time on the NIAAA board. That's such a special experience that a lot of the listeners are never going to get a chance, because their time, depending on which section you're in, could come once every 15 years to once every 24 years, depending on how many states you have in there. So talk about how special that is, and that
well, it was
experience with the
special,
board.
Mark, but unfortunately, I was too young in my career to fully appreciate my time on the board. And
Hmm.
it's still one of the best experiences in my career. I mean, I learned so much from so many at the board meetings. I wish I'd waited 15 years until our rotation came around again. I was, much more experienced. I think I could have offered much more to the board. I mean, I was late to my first meeting at the Orlando conference. I overslept. The only chair that was available around the table was next to President Jim Watkins, and so I served on the board during the Dwayne Kramer and Don Bales presidency. All great mentors. I was on the board during the transition to Kansas City. Uh, when you go to those board meetings, Frank would take you out to dinner. I mean, you'd
Hmm.
work all day, but then they would feed you. And I still remember going to our first dinner, and I'm sitting next to Frank, and we had a seafood place in downtown Kansas City, and they bring these big platters of shrimp and crab, and Frank said, "What do you think?" I says, "I have trouble eating anything seafood unless it's caught with a worm and a hook." But I would, in one of the years, we had a meeting in Indy prior to the move. They just wanted to get used to Indy, and so they were too late to book meals. So they had us book we'd go out in groups, and somebody in the group would pick up the meal. And I can still remember when Ty from Washington picked up the meal at the big steakhouse. I mean, it had to be like $800 tab, and that
Hmm.
NIAAA, but they always fed us well. One dinner I remember in particular when we was in Kansas City was going to the Marriott that was just across the highway from the building. And I get in the van with Jane Bennett from Michigan, and we're in the back, and we're not sure where we're going. And the driver of the van followed this car, and we ended up being at the casino down in Kansas City. Now this is before cell phones, Mark, and so
Ah,
Frank's beside himself, doesn't know where we're at. We end up driving back to the office, and Frank was there. And I mean, where we were supposed to go is to the Marriott right across the road, but we ended up at the casino. But my time on the board, I think the biggest accomplishment was the growth of the LTI program and the transition to Indy. But
sure.
met a lot of great people.
Let's have you share some thoughts about the fact that you've worked. I thought it was two, but you corrected me. You've worked for three executive directors in the state of Michigan, and I know
Yeah,
two of
well,
them. Obviously, I
when
know
I
George and
started,
Karen. Yeah,
right
go
when
ahead.
I started, the big names in Michigan were Jack Johnson, Dennis Kiley, Dom Domke, and Dom Domke was our treasurer of the association. Matter of the fact, the first time first year the MIAAA was an organization, he had to write a check for like $23 to balance the book at the end of the year. We've grown well since then because the amount of money we have in our funds is incredible. But Don was an interesting character. I remember the summer before the conference was going to be in Las Vegas. At our summer conference, one of our sessions was how to play blackjack because Don went to Las Vegas at least 13 times a year, and they would tell teach you the tricks of when to hold them, when to take a hit, when to do but the biggest thing I still remember from that session, and I'm not a big gambler. I mean, if I go to the casino, we'll drop some coins in the slot machines, and that's about it. I think I played blackjack once, but the biggest thing that still lives with me today, and I've shared with my daughters and wife, that if you do go to casino, treat it as entertainment funds and have a limit you can spend, whether it's $50, $100, and have a time limit. And whichever one ends first, walk out. He says, if you're going to be there for an hour and you have a quarter left, walk out. Otherwise, you're going to spend that quarter and or if you're only there a half hour and you've already gone through your 100, don't go through more. But, $100 at a casino, he says, no different than $100 at a good dinner. But Don was our first, the first one. And then when he retired, we started, I think that's the time that Athletic Administrators Associations started to develop executive directors, and George was a perfect fit for us. He was a well-known AD on the side of Detroit. Matter of fact, George, which interesting about George, I don't know if you remember, he was the first AD with his partner to develop a computer program for athletic scheduling. And there were a couple of years that he presented, or he was a vendor at the national conference, and in the Midwest, he spoke at Ohio and Iowa and Wisconsin, selling his computer program, which was kind of a forerunner to Schedule Star or Arbiter. But
Sure.
he was a longstanding, and I think he was a charter member of the formation of the NEDC.
He
Um,
was.
was helped with forming that, and then when he resigned, at one point in time, the job had gotten big, so we hired an assistant, and Karen Lennar was a perfect person to step in that role, and it just made sense for her to move into the uh, executive director position. I mean, the MIAAA had to change in executive directors the same year the MHSA did, and it's interesting, but all good people, all enjoy working with all of them.
Well, that's perfect. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions now about your personal life. Not too personal, but a lot of people may or may not know. One of them is that you're an accomplished traveler, and people don't know that you've driven to so many conferences. But I want you to talk about your travels across the U.S., particularly in our state here for our ADs in Utah, because I know you've been here a few times, and I know your daughter's here.
Well, my daughter was there. Well, my travels to Utah started when I was 16, when as a family, we went out to visit my aunt and uncle that lived in Las Vegas. And on the way out, we stopped at Zion and Bryce Canyon National
Mm-hmm.
Parks and spent some time there camping. I still remember that trip. I don't know where it was along the trip. We were in a pickup and we had a cap on the back. And my younger brother and sister that I mentioned previously were in the front seat of the pickup with me. My baby sister and mom and dad were in the back. Now, this was the pickup with a cap on it. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't, they were just there. Well, somewhere along the line, we came across the cactus with the arms that I had never seen before. And
Mm-hmm.
I had to slam over the brakes so we could take a picture. And my dad was pissed. We knocked milk over back there, and because they were, kind of back there. But we got our picture, and then for the next 100 miles, all we saw was that cactus standing up. But
Yeah,
that was my
absolutely.
first visit to Utah. We took our two daughters when they were 12 and 8 on a Western trip where we visited 13 national parks, including several in Utah. Um, and then my daughter, out of college, went to work for Fish and Wildlife and the National Forest Service for 8 years. One year she was based out of Moab, um, uh, removing non-native fish from the rivers, and
Mm-hmm.
so we've visited her several times. when she was out west. So we've always enjoyed our trip out west. And yes, I have driven in all 50 states, or all 40 states, and I've been to all 50. I guess I mean,
Okay.
I've driven in Hawaii and Alaska, but that was with rental cars.
Sure. Sure. Talk for a moment now. You've got a unique hobby that not many people know about. I do because I get to partake of these sweet treats every year at the conference. But talk about not many not many ADs from Michigan, male or across the nation, are as accomplished of a baker as you are.
Well, I take that as a compliment. I'm not sure accomplished is a key word, but I started baking as a stress release. And I would just bake cookies and take them back to school and give them away because I'm a person who likes seeing people smile. And then I develop a knack of uh, I can make a pretty good cheesecake too, and that I would give away. Um, then when I got into Facebook, not that I'm a techno wizard, I created a Facebook page for the Bear Hug Bakery, which then some of my colleagues actually thought I had a real bakery. Um, I'm really not in the business selling goods. Some people thought I should retire and open up a bakery, but they don't realize they work longer hours than athletic directors. Um, I have over the years sold some products when people request them, particularly at Christmas time. I'm not sure what year it was. I started bringing Christmas cookies to the NADC and sharing them with friends. Um, it's probably has gotten slightly out of hand as I develop more relationships. Um, I like driving, and Denver was the first conference in a while that I actually flew to. And the reason I flew to it, I was out in Bozeman, Montana that summer for my daughter's wedding, and I kept seeing these signs: pull over and put chains on your tires. And I didn't want to risk that driving to the Denver conference. So when I got back to Michigan, I booked a flight out of Grand Rapids. Well, I checked two bags to that conference, two big suitcases. One had my clothes and one had
One had
cookies.
the cookies. Yeah, there you go.
Driving to I was able to drive to Nashville, and I mean, I think I probably took over 50 dozen cookies to distribute in Nashville. I just enjoyed giving. People tell me they like them, so that makes me feel good.
Well, they do like them and I love them. So thank you so much. And thanks for sharing that. Let's ask you about your recent observations about the Nashville conference. I realize it's basically the first conference. We had the Tampa and then Denver. We kind of still had to do mass and stuff. So it was the first conference in 3 years that it was really back to somewhat normal. So share your observations about
Well,
that conference with our guests.
I thought I had some great sessions. I focused on sessions. I think there were three of them that were dealing with culture and developing school culture. Where I'm at Bangor, we need a big culture change. Maybe because of COVID, some things have gotten out of hand, and so attended those sessions. Um, I enjoyed reconnecting with friends and making new friendships. I had a great time teaching 501 with a fabulous teaching team, including Kevin Guzzo from Michigan, Chris Moskoff from Missouri, and one of your buddies, Ron Dolphin from
Absolutely.
Utah. And
From
on my
Moab,
bucket,
Utah.
yeah, and on my bucket list is to visit him this summer and take a trip down the river with him because he's a riverboat captain.
Right. We call him Captain Ron.
Yeah, Opryland is too spread out for my preference, Mark. When I
Yeah.
left my room for the day, I made sure I had everything I needed for the day for all my sessions. Um, you know, my even though it's very beautiful at Christmas time, I our first conference that I went to in Anaheim, they had a hotel reception Friday night maybe. They had 13 taco bars around the room, and all right, I don't have to buy food this night. I can eat here. Well, we go to the next year we're in Nashville at Opryland, and they have their hotel party, and I'm thinking I don't have to buy food. All they had was cheese and crackers. It was for a man that likes to eat. It was disappointing, but you know, I do enjoy. I am a Christmas person. I do enjoy the uh, sites at Opryland, but it's the hotel itself is pretty spread out.
Oh, absolutely. Fred, tell us what's the favorite part of your job?
It's no doubt. I mentioned it's no doubt. It's the relationships with the students, the coaches, the colleagues, the parents, I love the officials. I think that's why they like coming to our place. The custodial staff, the maintenance staff. Uh, I developed on Wednesday is walk-in Wednesday in my office. I'll bring in 3 dozen donuts, and you have you can't come in and get donuts for your neighbor. They have to come in so they can come in and say hi to me, so we can talk a little bit. Um, I just love the relationships I build with people, I was at our district wrestling last night, and gentleman from Martin came up and that knew me. I just couldn't picture his name, but it's the relationships that you build with people throughout your career that um, are the favorite part of my job.
Well said. Let's finish up with a couple of questions, Fred. The first one being, you've got 2 suggestions for a brand new AD, brand new being anywhere from 1 to 3 years, let's say, and they need to follow these 2 suggestions in order to be a success. What would your 2 suggestions be?
Well, I'll cheat and combine one into two or two
Okay.
into one. Um, First suggestion, the one my mentor gave me, was to attend your conferences. um, 10-year state and national conference. At least try to get the national conference once every 3 years. I'm fortunate that I've never missed one in my career. It's the relationships you develop there, and you find out you're not alone with the issues you got to deal with. All across the country, they're facing the same issues, and there are some people that have found answers that you can find to them. So as you attend them, develop a mentor, people you can call. I have people all across the country I can call. I try to stay in touch with and um, as a mentor. So I mean, you need to have somebody you can call when you need to. I just got off the phone today with a gentleman I guess I'm a mentor, have a good relationship with, that his league may be blowing up and he's trying to decide what to do with his school. And the second one is, which I touched on earlier, it's a relationship business. Develop the relationships with everybody. Um, they all want what's best for kids. And sometimes you're going to have to agree to disagree in where you're going to go. But if you have a good relationship with them, it, um, you can move on and see what happens. So the 2 things: attend your conferences to network and build the relationships.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that. We'll finish up with this, Fred. What question should I have asked you that I failed to ask you?
Well, you kind of asked it. You said I like to drive. You didn't ask me how many miles I have on my car now.
Oh, now this, yes, and I should have asked. So I know how
Yeah.
many you had on your last car. Tell us how
And how
many you
many?
had on your
How
current
many?
car.
Do you remember what I had on my last car? How much
I
What
I
you meant?
thought it was over 450,000, closer to
It was
490.
no 537.
Yeah, okay.
It's 537. Actually, when it got to 500, I was going to buy a new one, and I ordered one and it came in, but all of a sudden now we were moving and buying a house. I told, nah, car's still running. I'm going to drive it another year. My current one is 328,000. The goal is 600. The other question you failed to ask, which surprised me, being where your office is if I finished my book on UP golf.
Oh, and I should have asked you that because I knew. So let's talk for a moment about that. And
Well,
I was going to ask you, I
what
forgot, but talk about your book because I know that you've played, and I know Garvey's played some of the courses with you, but talk for a minute
right,
about that.
it was one of my bucket lists. Growing up, we'd go to the UP, probably every other summer. And if you've been across Mackinac Bridge and you take a left on US 2, there's a golf course right there between Highway 2 and the lake. And I said, that'd be cool to play those golf. And then it came to, it'd be cool to play every golf course in the UP. Well, when I first retired, I took 2 summers and played all 50 golf courses. And I'm probably in the second draft of my book. I don't know how long it took you to write your fabulous book,
It took a
but
while.
so and now that I'm back working full time, it's kind of on the back burner. But the title of the book is UP Golf: Michigan's Hidden Secrets. They got some great golf courses up there. One thing I did learn as a golfer: there's no such thing as a bad golf course. Um, Number two, I learned that if every golf course had the money to spend on course maintenance that casinos have, the golf courses would be fabulous. But casinos have their golf course not to draw golfers, but to draw people into their casino. So, which are, there's some great golf courses in the UP.
Well, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that, and forgive me because I've had that on my list and I just didn't write it down because I know you'd spent some summers there. So that is fascinating. On that note, that finishes up another edition of the UIAAA Connection. Again, our guest today has been Fred Smith, CMAA and Director of Athletics at Bangor High School. Fred, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Mark. My pleasure.
For our
Enjoy listening
listeners,
to him.
For our listeners, we hope you tune in again next week for another edition of the UIAAA Connection.